We are now very live. You know, it's one of my favorite things about doing one of these is the fact that I get to see folks fill in, sort of storm the virtual auditorium. Already there are 30 people who have joined us in the last split second. So I assume that there's a very, very interested audience in the rare books market. Gosh, look at this. Already 52 people, and they're just keep on coming. Lou, I'm sure they're all here for you, though.
I think they're probably mostly relatives.
Well, I think you, Sam, and I may have some relatives who are joining us. But I'm Robert Wolonsky, the communications director here at Heritage Auctions. And there's somebody who's left me a lovely question right there in the Q&A. Thank you very much for that. He misses my dulcet tones, so I will try to speak as deeply as and softly as I possibly can today. I'm Robert Wolonsky, the communications director here at Heritage Auctions, and we are here for the state of the market commentary about the rare books world. And I am very, very happy to be joined here by Lou Weinstein, our vice president of rare books, and Samantha Sisler, the production specialist in rare books. This is going to be a pretty freewheeling conversation. We're going to look back at some sales that have taken place in the last year. We'll look forward to the auction that is upcoming in June. We'll get to all that in just a moment. I do want everybody to ask questions. Feel free to drop a question in the Q&A box. I will get to them throughout the course of the hour. I do not like to save questions. The fact is, if you have a question, it is relevant to our conversation, I will ask Lou and Sam during the course of this conversation, because we are here for you. We started doing these, about a year ago, and obviously it was at a time when we could not all be together, but certainly folks are welcome back into the office these days. If there's something you want to see in the auction, feel free to reach out to Samantha. Lou will be in the office next week, as a matter of fact. I'm very, very eager to meet you, Lou, and to talk about the extraordinary library that you have behind you. It's as though you were well prepared for an event like this. What is behind you, Lou, before we begin? I'm sure people will want to know anyway.
Well, behind me right now is about 3,000 children's books, some first editions, but not all, but it's actually a working library. My wife is a librarian, and my children will read a book every night before they went to bed from the age of 3 to 13. And so they're pretty familiar with it. But that's just about half of it. I'm embarrassed to show you the whole thing.
Well, it's a beautiful library. I could not be more envious. This is really a thrill to talk about with you guys. Let's begin at the beginning, which is certainly we have had this conversation in many of these commentaries that I have led over the last several months about how markets have changed dramatically over the course of the pandemic. And Samantha and Lou, I just wanted to begin there. Have you seen a dramatic change in terms of what people are buying and how much they're paying for the things they are buying in the last 12 months?
Well, one thing I noticed, if I could jump in, Sam, is that there's a lot more attention to the book world because, for one thing, people were home more and they had access to their hobbies and they had more free time. And so because of that, and a lot of good material has been coming on the market, which is helpful too. From one generation to next, a number of private collections have been hitting the rooms. And when material is there, interest peaks. You have to continue feeding collectors. Once you stop offering material, they sometimes their interest wanes. That's how I see it. So do you feel that the market's very attentive now, Sam?
Yeah, Lou, I totally agree. I think that kind of the pandemic has been a perfect storm for us. I've noticed collectors, consigners, sellers, buyers are engaging with us more, especially in the weeks when we produce the catalog, the weeks leading up to the auction. People are asking a lot of great questions about the pieces in the collection, so they're engaging with us earlier. We've been fortunate enough that we're able to post the auctions a little bit earlier than expected. So this June auction's been online for over a week now, and we've seen really healthy bidding, and we're excited about. And then, you know, collectors are asking really good questions about provenance, about edition points, about condition, and that's the best part of the job, to engage with collectors and see what they're looking for and what they're collecting.
The sad thing is that it used to be people would come to auctions and they travel more. And now most of our bidding is done online, if not 95%. Used to be, the room would be 50, 75 people for a good sale. Now, if you get 5 people, it's a lot, but we have more bidders than ever because of the free time people have.
Yes, and I miss seeing people, at previews, but I'm always on my email. I'm always checking my phone. So if people have questions, call. I mean, that's my favorite thing to do is just talk to books. So as long as I get to talk to them, it's not awful, but seeing in person will definitely, I'm looking forward to that.
Well, I'm interested in talking about what habits have changed. Certainly people have had more free time to go through their books, to see what they wanted to get rid of, to see what they wanted to collect, what they wanted to expand. Did you find, and we'll go through this in a moment in terms of looking at some specific examples, but did you find that their interests changed? That they were more interested in collecting one certain thing, that they were interested in parting with things that you were surprised about over the last year?
Well,
Yeah, go ahead, Lou.
no. Well, one thing that's really affected the market, if I could go back a little, is the internet. It gave us a much better understanding of how plentiful or how rare material is. Things that were thought to be obscure are now found to be available in 5 or 10 copies. So there's a much tighter control of the valuations. The market is much clearer and easier to understand. I mean, that's one thing I noticed. I also think there are a lot of new collectors starting to come out into the book world, especially in 20th century material, because that's abundantly plentiful compared to the 15th to 18th century material. It used to be when people described rare books, they wouldn't look at anything under 100 years old. And now you Google rare books and you'll see Stephen King and all kinds of 20th century authors. Whereas the antiquarian booksellers in the past never really thought of 20th century books as antiquarian books.
So I will say this, questions are coming in. I do appreciate that very much. And look, one of the things I love most about doing these discussions is the fact that you can chime in. Folks haven't been able to necessarily come visit us. So we're doing this for our clients and for our viewers and for collectors. So I'll just start off with a question from James. James wants to know, is there a recommended resource to help with identifying the condition of a book? As a collector, I find the descriptions vary.
Well, there's no kind of standard when it comes to how books are typically described because they're so vast. The number of places you can find books. There are other auction houses. Of course, Heritage has the best descriptions, in my personal opinion and professional opinion. And then also old catalog listings. So we try to be as thorough as possible. When I started in the industry, I was trained to describe books as though the person who is buying them will never physically see it and will never see any pictures. So I try to paint a complete perfect picture of what I'm looking at in front of me. Now I know that that's not the case, that I send pictures to clients all the time. We have great photos on our website that are enlargeable and people can really look detailed at conditions. But I think in general, you just have to ask the seller, ask the dealer, ask the auction house, ask me. I'm happy to tell you everything I see.
The best way, I think, is to go backwards. We work on the assumption that every book is mint, and then we describe any variants from that. Mint except dust jacket is worn, mint except it's rebacked, mint except there's fraying or foxing. Anything that changes the book from the published state should be pointed out by a professional.
Do you ever foresee a time in which rare books will be graded the way that cards are, the way that comics are, the way that pulps now are, that there will be a uniform grading system for rare books? Or is it simply such a disparate collectible that that's never going to happen, that it's just it's not viable?
Well, the reason it's not going to happen is because there are too many variables. With something like a coin, you could look at the surfaces. With a book, there's the internal factor, external factor, and there's a collation variants, that is, changes in pagination or something. But and also I don't think they would be universally used. It's been tried over the years in our National Trade Association, the ABAA, the Antiquarian Book Sales Association of America. It's been discussed. In fact, when I was president, we were trying to put together a 1 to 10 system, but it never got off the table because there was too much dispute among experts. So I believe there will never be a numbering system, although people tend to use it for themselves. Some dealers will make up their own system, say, I give this an 8 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10, but it's really arbitrary and rather subjective. I don't recommend it.
Yeah, and I can tell you when heritage catalogers, including myself, when we catalog rare books, we have kind of a I don't want to say 5-point scale, but fine is almost near mint, and it's very rare that such a description is used. Fine literally means it's as published. Very rare that we see something like that, because once it's left the publishing house, it's been touched, and even the slightest wrinkle, especially in a dust jacket, can affect people's perception of it. So fine, then we go to near fine, which is still virtually perfect with maybe only a blemish or two. Very good is what we typically see with antiquarian books, because if the book is 200, 300, 400 years old, it's obviously going to have some wear. But if the joints are holding, the hinges are holding, the pages are intact, the binding is sound, just as books age, things like foxing and worming are hard to avoid, but that doesn't affect the integrity of the book. And so very good is still a very nice book.
The one expression I really dislike is used, I think, more by amateurs: good for its age. When we look at the 17th or 18th century book, we still have to point out the same defects if it's a 20th century book. There's no reason to be forgiving because the book is falling apart and say, well, it's still all there, so it's good for its age.
Only
it's okay to talk to
be described as good for their age.
People, right? It was okay. You and I, the rest of us, I'm not sure.
Jim wants to know if, I guess, do you grade books if someone consigns it with heritage? I guess what Jim's asking here is, if you could, for those who are on the call, and there are many, many people, could you walk through the process a little bit about how the consignment goes in terms of how the condition is set upon? And is there ever a disagreement between the consigner and the expert in terms of how that book should be discussed and graded?
Yes, certainly there's always going to be professional disagreements. My responsibility at Heritage is I'm a production specialist and I'm an evaluation specialist. So when property comes in from our consigners through our consignment directors, Lou is one of them, I see the property when it comes in-house, and I'm responsible for assessing values. So I assign auction estimates, and I do preliminary work on descriptions before it's handed off to a cataloger. Sometimes I am that cataloger. And so condition, while it's not, graded on like a number scale, condition certainly factors into my price evaluation of the book. And I take, extensive notes. You should see all the crazy Excel sheets I have, color coded, of course, that kind of help me keep track of not only the condition of this book in and of itself, but also compared to other offerings or other similar copies, whether it's by the same author, same publisher, because you have to understand the quality of the book in context of what's available and what has already been offered.
We have a lot of questions, and I have to say that's one of my favorite things about this. Janet says, good to hear about increased interest in 20th century books. I have about 25 Anais Nin books with 15 or so autographed, as well as an autographed Sandberg book and a Henry Miller autographed. I am thinking of consigning. I am sure Sam and Lou are very happy to hear that, which reminds me, could the two of you tell someone how to get a hold of you if, in fact, they have questions or would like to consign something? Lou, I'll let you go first.
Well, I mean, if you go to the webpage, my name, Lou Weinstein, would be on it, and I'd answer any questions. Of course, you could just contact Heritage Auctions directly, and the book department will respond. But the authors are there. You mentioned Miller and Nin are all in the same circle, and although we're interested in them, they were fairly prolific, and we're particularly interested in the early Paris editions. The later books were done in abundance, and we tend not to accept individual items that are valued at under $500, which a lot of Miller and Nin are.
But that said, if they want to get a hold of you, Sam, go ahead and tell folks how to get a hold of you if they want to have questions about these books or any others.
Sure. My email address is ssler, S as in Sam, and then my last name, Sisler, SISLERHA.com. I kind of bop around a lot, so I'm almost never at my phone, but my email is the best way to reach me, and I get back to people, within an hour or two.
In 10 seconds or so, I had planned to go to the look at the recent sales, and we'll do that. But look, we're here for folks who have questions. You have questions, let's get them answered. Here's a question that says, can you suggest a resource for our clients and myself for best practices to care for and catalog a collection? As a fiduciary, and we see a lot of fiduciaries, there's a lot of folks on these calls, insurance and others, who have interest in making sure that they take care of collections. So I wanted to explain that. It's frustrating to plan for a client with no idea whether the library contains important or unusual items. So can you provide some very basic guidelines in terms of caring for and cataloging a collection?
That's actually many questions in once. Earlier books would have a different requirement, temperature control maybe, and because of extreme temperatures you want to avoid and so on. Most of the literature published on it is published by libraries, and if you ask that question on Google, reference book on care and preservation of your library, half a dozen titles will pop up. Don't you think, Sam?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
The only thing you want to do is avoid extreme temperatures. If it gets too hot, you don't want to be in sunlight, direct sunlight on it, or too cold. Books are amazingly durable. In fact, earlier books are more durable than some of the later books. Early printed books, a lot of them, the paper was red paper, which didn't oxidize as much as some of the 19th century paper, which is very brittle and browns and oxidizes. Or you're going to go pop in the auction, huh?
Well, I figure while we're people might want to start looking at some books. There's a lot of questions, and the fact is, questions are piling up for the two of you. I know there's some stuff we also wanted to address, and maybe some of this discussion will spur some other questions, or maybe answer some others. So obviously, there is a rare book auction upcoming, beginning at 11 a.m. Central Time on Wednesday, June 9th, that takes place through the 3 p.m. session on Thursday, June 10th. I'm incredibly excited about it. It's a lot of incredibly important pieces. One of the reasons I came to Heritage a year ago is because I was very excited to be around rare books as someone who collects myself, and whose son collects and has collected books from the 1800s since he was 12 years old, because he just thought there was no way. He just didn't understand how they survived this long when he was a little kid, and now has bookshelves full of them. So I guess everyone gets into collecting for very different reasons. But we wanted to talk about the fact that, and certainly there have been many questions that have been dropped in the Q&A, including, did you see an increase in rare book prices over the last year in the pandemic? Certainly, Sam, you had pulled this copy of The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien to discuss that very thing. It sold for $60,000 last year. Let's talk about why that happened.
Well, I think we were all pleasantly surprised with exactly how well it did. Because it's a modern first edition, the dust jacket is particularly important. And this is a first edition, first issue, and the first issue dust jacket. So on the back flap, there is a printing error. Charles Dodson, also known as Lewis Carroll's name, was misspelled, and so it's hand corrected in ink. So that's always going to be, that's one of the holy grails of collecting Tolkien. And it's an excellent example. Now you can see it's not a perfect example. You know, it certainly has flaws. There's worming, there's some staining, there's some sunning on the dust jacket, on the spine, but it's a gorgeous copy, and the colors are still bright. And I think it's a great
On a
example.
dust jacket, you're particularly concerned about a loss of text or image. And in this, there's virtually no loss. If there was a tear, even if it was 2 inches missing from the corner, it probably would have affected 15, 20% or more. The idea is the dust jacket is the first issue and complete. And as far as valuation, the first copy that I sold was in 1960s, and I got $1,500 for it. And I felt guilty about taking so much money. So guilty, a little guilty. But one thing about high-end books in general, in the children's books, I've never seen any go down over the years. The $5,000 books are $7,000, $10,000, $12,000. They don't fluctuate $10,000, $5,000, $2,000. It's the low-end books, the books that are a few $100s and become the more plentiful as far as the number of copies around, and so those books may not move much. But the more expensive the material, the more likely it is to appreciate, because it's expensive for a reason. Limited number of copies, large audience. You know.
By the way, while we're looking at this lot page, I want to address something that Mark asks in the Q&A. It says ABA Books allows for up to 5 pictures per book, and I find that it typically takes 4 or 5 pictures to show a jacket and all sides of a book. It seems HA, Heritage, rarely shows more than 2 pictures of a book. Is there a reason why you don't more thoroughly photograph books? Well, I'm looking at 5, 6 photographs right here, as a matter of fact. I assume that there is necessarily a limit or reasons why some things may have more photos than others?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm responsible for photo carding the books and for choosing what gets photographed. Now, there's certainly kind of a standard when a modern first edition will have its the dust jacket, have the book photographed in the dust jacket like you see there, angled. We also do recto and verso of the dust jacket, completely folded out so you can see everything. And the good thing about Heritage photos and the website in general is that all those pictures are expandable. So you know, within 2 photos, you're seeing everything you can, and you can zoom in really closely and see, you know, the 1/4 inch, you know, slight scuff on the dust jacket kind of thing. I try to, even though sometimes the photographers get a little annoyed when I ask for, you know, 10 photos of a book, but they oblige me eventually. And, you know, we try to photograph far more than 2 typically, especially with modern first editions in dust jackets. But the other thing is, if you're looking for something specific to a lot and there isn't a photo, give me a call, drop a question on the website, and those come to me. I'll take them with my phone and I'll email them to you right away. I can do Zoom meetings. I want people to see my books. I love these books. I'm proud of them. I'm proud of what we do. And you know, if a question is not being answered, just let me know.
I also wanted to go to this. So obviously we have another Hobbit that's upcoming in this sale. And this is certainly a different kind of an offering in as much as that this one is autographed. And I'm fascinated because if I'm not mistaken, Tolkien didn't really sign that many books, correct?
Correct. And particularly, he didn't sign very many American printings. And this, I believe, is an American printing. So it's pretty exciting that we have a Tolkien signature on this copy.
So talk to me about, you know, this is something, Sam, you and I have talked about a great deal. If a book is inscribed, if a book is signed, if a book is inscribed to somebody of note, certainly I would assume that the fact that this is a Tolkien signing an American copy, which wasn't often done, significantly impacts the value of this book, the collectability of this book. Talk to me a little bit about, and talk to everyone here a little bit about the factors that make books collectible, not simply the fact that it's a first edition or that it's survived, but talk to me about the things that you have found that have made books more valuable in the last year in terms of what people are really looking for aside from that book itself.
Good question.
Well, one thing is related to signed books. They're looking for association. It's amazing how important a good association could be. It could change the value 5 or 10 times. And also it's important to understand some people like J.D. Salinger's was known hardly ever to sign books. So any book of his inscribed would be quite rare. Whereas other people like Ray Bradbury, who was actually a friend of mine, was a very generous signer and would sign stacks of books. And so even though he's gone, his books are collectible, they'll never be rare because they're available in abundance. So it really takes a specialist to understand how plentiful. One of the things, of course, we look for is the person still producing. People still writing, like Stephen King, his books are very collectible, but he's still producing. And so we don't know his total output. So it's hard to really get a grasp, even though he's popular, on ultimately how they'll be viewed, you know.
Sam?
Did I answer your question or did I make up a new story?
No, you look. I'm as I told Sam a year ago, as someone who has a house full of books, some of them are inscribed to me, some of them I bought over the years, some of them have different ages, different conditions. I'm always fascinated just sort of by the overall. You don't collect. I've never collected books, and I'm sure many folks on here don't necessarily collect for value. You collect for different reasons. You collect because, and we tell everyone, never buy something because you just think it's an investment. You should buy something also because you love it. I mean, you're surrounded, Lou, in that house by thousands of books. You love those
But
books.
people should not be deceived in believing that first editions are valuable. 95% of all books never made a second edition. There wasn't sufficient interest. And then the other 5%, well, most of them aren't necessarily collected. So it's a small percentage of them that are collected. And if a book is inscribed, it again may not even add anything to the value, because if it's not a collectible book, that is the first edition of a book that is the author's most important book, scarcest book, had impact on other books, there's a positive reason why the book appreciates in value. So I just don't want people to. The other thing, can I jump back to one thing, and that is, be careful for restored dust jackets. I see a lot of people offering books mint in dust jacket and then small print jacket restored. A worn dust jacket is a worn dust jacket. No matter how much you paint it and add paper to it, it should only be valued for the few $100 it costs to restore, plus the worn dust jacket. Don't think of it as a fine copy. Just wanted to throw that out there, because I see a lot of people pricing them or evaluating the same, as if this jacket was restored. It would look brand new, but it really wouldn't be worth but a few $100 more than a copy in this condition. Do you agree with that, Sam?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Your job is to agree with me. I have to remind you.
No, absolutely. That's true.
Yeah.
Let me, by the way, let me remind folks, go ahead and drop your questions in the Q&A, not in the chat. It's easier for me to access in this particular form. I know some folks have been dropping questions in the chat. Go ahead, please do so in the Q&A, where questions are indeed piling up. Lou, this is a question for you from Joe. As an esteemed former rare book dealer yourself, how do you see the relationship these days between rare book dealers and auction houses?
Well, it's an interesting thing in that the auction houses have become, in a sense, the new retailers, because you have a better understanding of the market, because there's a real underbidder. When a bookseller prices a book $5,000, it could well be worth it. But when you buy a book at $5,000 at auction, you could have the security of knowing there's an underbidder. So in a sense, I find the auction prices are somewhere between wholesale and retail. If a book's worth $15,000, a dealer wishes to buy it at $7,500, you could often buy it at $9,000 or $10,000 because the deal won't work on that market, or $11,000. So it's a pretty attractive place. And I think collectors are really looking at the auction houses as much or more so than the dealers, although the dealers get private material that they often price very competitively too. I'm not discounting that. I'm just saying it's a very.
Well, that's why I'm pulling up the Penzler books from the Penzler collection, because obviously these, Samantha, you and I, during the course of this auction a few months ago, were watching this with tremendous awe at the prices some of these books were realizing. If they had been in a rare book dealer's shelves, they certainly may not have gone for this. And certainly the market said that these books were worth this much. Talk to me a little bit about how this went down and what you think this did to sort of reshape this particular market, or if this was in fact one of those things that was tied to the fact that this had an extraordinary provenance, which was the Otto Penzler collection.
I think certainly it has a lot to do with provenance, because Otto Penzler is such a force in the industry of not just rare books, but specifically mystery and detective fiction. Not only is he a collector personally, but he has Mysterious Bookshop in New York. He published a number of books, and he had a lot of relationships with the authors of the books he collected. So, I mean, there was an Ellery Queen that sold in the last Otto Penzler session, because there were 4 auctions. One was an internet only, but 3 auctions over a 2-year period. And I can't remember if it was the Roman Hat Mystery. One of them had just the greatest inscription from the author, actually a pseudonym of 2 authors, but and it was inscribed to Otto Penzler himself. What a find. So not only is the author acknowledging that it's a rare book, he is inscribing it later to a collector who's just such a force in the industry. So I think people were really interested in Otto's collection because of who he was and what he did for the genre. And we were just so thrilled to handle it.
Another thing, if I could add, excuse me for interrupting, I find single theme sales do very well. If you have 20 detective books in with 300 other books, even if they're good books, they wouldn't necessarily do as well if the entire sale was detective fiction, because all the people in that world come out, and it tends to do better in the room. So if you have, you're thinking of consigning, instead of consigning just a handful of things, if you could consign enough to make a single owner sale in one area, I think you'd be surprised that it will do considerably better.
Well, we saw that with the Justin Schiller collection as well.
Right.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, absolutely.
And this, I believe this was from that as well. Was this not from the Schiller?
No, that was from last October.
Okay.
But
that was.
Yes.
She's memorized the sale. I'm impressed.
I try to, Lou. I'm having a day. I carry a lot of junk around with me. I trust Samantha to have memorized all of this. You know, I want to go back to and look, there are many questions piling up. So gosh, where to even begin? You know what? I'll begin here because I want to.
Was that one of the questions?
What's that?
Was that one of the questions? Where to begin?
Yes. That
was the Wizard of Oz, wonderful place.
Well, let's start here because somebody asks. This obviously set a record, and somebody asks, how do we set estimates? And I want to begin there because certainly one cannot necessarily know when a book is going to set a record. But certainly when it does, you begin to ask yourselves why. I assume that there are discussions about what made this particular copy of The Wonderful World of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz the record setter in this particular moment. So talk to me a little bit about this, what made this so singular, and how we arrive at estimates, and how obviously things blow far, far past them in this auction and every auction.
Well, I'm typically in charge of setting estimates for the bulk of the material in the auctions. That's not to say I don't have input from James Gannon, the director. I call Lou when I don't know what to do. If I've seen something that is just, there are no comps, something like this has never before been on the market, I call Lou in a panic because inevitably he's seen something and can offer a lot of advice on how to position it in the sale and what kind of estimate to put on it. This particular copy of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, we knew would do well. I think it was estimated at $20,000. I assumed it would go higher. You know, part of what we do is to set sometimes conservative estimates because that draws more people in. The more people you have looking at a lot, the more people are going to bid competitively against each other and ultimately drive up the price. But this copy in particular is stunning. I mean, the colors are so bright. There's almost no sunning on the spine. It does not surprise me in the least that it set a record because ultimately it's a children's book and children handled these. And for a copy like this to be in such fine condition with almost no staining, with no soiling, I mean, the pictures don't even do it justice. You have to see
Yeah, but
it in person.
more importantly, it had a lot of the first issue points for the
Yeah, it had all the
illustrations, text bindings. That it's a more complicated book. That book has a wider range than almost any children's books. You could find one looks just like it, not in good condition, for $1,000, and that would be a fair price. I'd like to add something I mentioned earlier. There is actually one copy known that was issued in dust jacket of that book. I personally sold it in the 1960s to a Santa Barbara collector, and I've since been unable to track it down. But if that ever came in the rooms, it would probably bring $250,000 to $300,000 in my judgment. So if you find it, call me.
Yeah, me too, please.
Hell,
What
call
did the
me.
jacket look like, Lou?
The dust jacket copies the front cover and has the George M. Hill imprint. I've seen dust jackets where the bottom imprint of the jacket is torn away. That's because it wasn't George M. Hill. It was either Donahue or a later one. But it's identical in color, and it's actually a little brittle. Mine was frayed, and I felt bad it was frayed, but I didn't know at the time. I was embarrassingly young how rare it was. In those days, a wizard was $350 to $500. So in dust jacket, I thought I was being ambitious. Oh, to go back in time. This is really a lovely copy, though.
So obviously we have several copies in the sale that's upcoming in June. Samantha, would you like to talk about these 3 copies that you had asked me to pull up here so we could discuss these 3 and what makes these different?
Yeah, sure. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz has a really complicated printing history, as Lou touched on. So as with a lot of books that have plates in them, the text block was printed at a different time than the plates. So some of the plates have different points. If you go to the next image, that's an early plate because it has those 2 dots on the sun, like right here. Those were taken out in later printing. So that's indicative of an earlier iteration. And that's what people like. That's what people collect, these earlier iterations.
Right.
But don't be confused. Most books don't have complicated bibliographical points. Just so happen the Wizard is one with 10 or 12 different issue points.
Yeah, and we have the bibliographies and we pore over them and we take notes. So this is an example of a slightly later iteration.
And it would be helpful to people to understand also, sometimes we talk about issue and sometimes we talk about state. Issue is usually related to typographical changes. State is often related to the state of an illustration. And sometimes people interchange them, but that's how they should properly be used.
To that point, Ken asks, please discuss the focus. He editorializes and said, the silly focus on first edition, first issue, first state, minutia. Why should someone care to that level?
Well, I care because my buyers care. So I think a lot of people, they want to see the first one. They collect the first one because they think that most closely relates to what the author originally intended, which is sometimes the case, not always the case. Mark Twain was constantly refining his editions, so some of the later editions actually more closely align with what he initially envisioned. But I think it comes down to the competitive nature of humans, and we want the first one.
Well, I'd add one thing to that, and that is that people say, well, I could get just a reading copy. What do I need a first edition? And I say, that's true. And you could get a Picasso painting, or you could get a photograph of the Picasso. One is the appearance as Picasso produced it, or as the author oversaw it and the publisher as it initially appeared. The other is one of multiple reprints, which have a very limited value. I feel the same way about books. The first appearance is the first appearance. You know.
Do you buy will you have a first edition to put on a shelf and and a later edition, a paperback version just to read?
Well, old collectors used to say you should have 3 copies of every book, one to collect, one to loan to your friends, and one to read. But I try to keep it to 2. But I will definitely keep a reading copy of an unusually valuable book. And if I had the first edition. I'm actually not an active collector myself. I accumulate material, and I happen to buy them because I enjoy the process. But I don't focus on one particular field. I just love books, so I'll touch on anything. I know you didn't ask that question, but I don't.
But that goes to the sort of larger overall point of all of these conversations that we have. You know, all of us who work here collect to a certain extent. It's a gene that we have, that we just like the nature. We love a thing to the point where we want all of it, whether it's the music I have behind me, the books I have around me, the comic books I have from my childhood that I continue to collect. We all collect things, but certainly, as we pointed out earlier, you collect the things you love, but you should love the things you collect. You know, so much of what we've discussed over the last year is why have prices increased? Certainly, that is an incredibly interesting and a very important topic for us, for our clients, and for our consigners. But at the end of the day, this still comes down to collecting a thing you genuinely love and a thing you want to be around and to be surrounded by. I mean, I look at the background you have behind you, Lou. You love the things that we're talking about here. This isn't a business. This is a love affair.
Oh, absolutely. Right. And but I surround myself with things that I use and read, but I have a separate area of my world, whereas collectible books, which have appreciated in value, which I keep in a different area. That's all.
Ken, by the way, says about that discussion about first edition, first date, and so forth. Mark Twain was who he, in fact, had in mind. So,
great example. Mark Twain had, that was one of our specialties. And Twain, almost every book has bibliographical points, and it affects the value considerably. And you should really, the question is, would you rather have a mint copy of a later issue or just a good copy of the first issue? There's an argument for both sides. And I think you shouldn't discount a book if it's in lovely condition, even if it's a later state.
Samantha, what would you say?
Yeah, I think Lou's exactly right. And that's, you know, you should collect what you personally, what you think is more important. And that's why we offer such a wide range of material, and why I feel fortunate to see, you know, different iterations of The Wizard of Oz in different amounts of condition, through multiple sales, so that, you know, we're
can I jump back to one other point you just made about collecting? There is a collecting mentality. I find a lot of collectors, especially people who are fairly well off, they'll switch. They'll go from coins to stamps to photographs to books. And a couple of years and they'll be saturated and move on. And there are other people, even though they could financially afford it, have no interest. I'm always fascinated when I bring somebody to my house. I show them a fantastic collection of rare books. I open my cases and they look at it and say, "Where did you get these bookshelves? They're just beautiful." And I'll say, "What do you mean? Look at the books." "Oh yeah, I guess they're okay, but we got to get shelves like these." And I'm thinking they're never going to be a collector. No potential. Just thought I'd throw that in because it amused me.
You know, Lou, this is our first opportunity to talk, and I'm very glad to say that it will not be our last. I'm looking forward to you being in the office next week, as my office is right across the hall from yours.
Well, I will definitely come and say hello. Thank you.
So, look, there are many questions, and I want to get to all of them, and we will get to all of them. I always promise it will last an hour, and I know back 6 months ago, maybe more folks had time to spend an hour during lunch on a phone call like this. But everybody we still have more than 80 people with us just on Zoom. I'm not sure on Facebook Live, and we will record this. We are recording this to put onto YouTube for folks who want to rewatch it. I know I'll watch it. I'll just put it on a loop in the background. But for years, obviously, Samantha and Lou, we thought of rare books as antiquarian. We thought of it as pieces from the 18th, from the 1800s, from the 1600s, and so forth. Certainly, there has been dramatic interest in that stuff as well. This is we'll get to the 20th century in a moment again, but certainly, can you talk to me about what you have seen in the antiquarian world over the last year?
Can I throw a quick thought in? I'm very much aware that there are more collectors of 20th century books than 19th century and 18th century books. And it's not because they're not interesting, it's because they're more accessible. Some of the great high spots don't appear very often, and it's frustrating to build a great, you can't build a Shakespeare collection except for later editions, but even 19th century people like Bronte or Austen, they're very costly and few on the market. But 20th century books were done large enough printings that you have to be able to feed your collection. So, and people relate to it because they've read it more recently. So the biggest change I notice is a lot of 19th century authors that were once popular, like Henry James, who was, when I started out in business, was one of the biggest authors, is collected, but not to the same. Wilkie Collins and even Dickens material hasn't appreciated a great deal because only the high spots in it. I'm just saying there's a larger focus on 20th century material than I would have guessed.
That said, if someone has an interest in Shakespeare, here's the Julius Caesar extractor from the first folio that is in the upcoming auction, correct, Sam?
Yes, it is. This is really exciting because the first folio is the first time Shakespeare ever appeared in print. And to have one of his most well-known plays represented here is pretty incredible.
Well, right, it's the first collected edition. They originally appeared in quartos, in which they were given away at theaters to follow along with the play from 1590s on. But after the play, people discarded these printed versions, which are now known in 1, 2, and 3 copies and worth hundreds of thousands, if not several $1 million or more. But they rarely appear on the market. But this is the first appearance because Shakespeare died in, I think, 1616. So this was 7 years after his death.
So let's talk a little bit about, we have been asked a lot over the course of this conversation in many different ways about Hemingway, about are we seeing a new value increases in early first edition Hemingway as they near their centennial publishing anniversaries because of the documentary, the Ken Burns documentary. It's interesting, in sports card, for instance, there was a dramatic increase in Michael Jordan rookie cards right after ESPN began airing the Last Dance documentary. So do documentaries, do films, this is a couple of questions combined together, help spur the increase in and value of authors? And do you find that as anniversaries approach, as centennials approach, that also has an impact on the value?
Yeah, absolutely. I think oftentimes it educates people who may not have known or been aware that this was even something that they could collect, that they could see that existed. Now, this particular copy that you're showing, I think, has tremendous value, even regardless of the centenary, because not only is it an inscribed and signed copy, but it's a presentation copy from Hemingway to one of his friends. And not just of any edition. I mean, technically it's a first edition, but it's an advanced copy. So there are only 15 made. And this is one of those 15 given by Hemingway to a friend with just the loveliest inscription. I mean, it's got to be the high spot of collecting Hemingway. I mean, I don't know how many Hemingway books I could think of that would almost be better than this one.
Right. It's quite beautiful. In the 50 years I've been playing with rare books, Hemingway and Fitzgerald are the top authors that have been always collected. And it's true that documentaries or movie versions of any of the books bring a lot of attention to it. I found even when I was active in my own business, when Oprah recommended a book like East of Eden, I get 30 calls for a first edition of East of Eden. You know, so popular promotions like that make a big difference.
Well, it's interesting. Brian asked in the Q&A, is a generically signed book without personalization better than a personally signed book? Obviously, as we've said, you know, it doesn't get better than this.
Right. Well, a personal inscription like this, you can't improve upon much, but Hemingway, unfortunately, also has a lot of bad signatures out there. I'm always cynical of just a signature by itself. I would guess there are more forgeries than good signatures, and you got to be careful where you get it from, if the provenance from who it came from, if it's sold before, how far back you could trace it. But there's a famous story, if I could add just briefly, where
Sure.
Hemingway and Fitzgerald were sitting in Scribner's office, who was their publisher, and they were both drinking a little, waiting for Charles Scribner to come out, and they had a stack of books to sign. Hemingway was scribing his books and signing them F. Scott Fitzgerald, but with sort of a little off-color inscriptions. And then Fitzgerald did the same thing. So if you ever see an off-color inscription by Hemingway, it could have been done by Fitzgerald and vice versa. Those books have never surfaced because people probably tossed them away and said, this is not Fitzgerald's handwriting. Something to look for.
I didn't know that.
It's recounted in David Randall's Dukedom Large Enough. Wonderful story.
Just told me to order that. It's on my list.
Okay.
Nancy asks, I don't see any estimates on the website, only the current bid. Where do I find estimates for auctions, Samantha?
I'm actually not sure that they're on the website. Typically in rare books, we open at half of the low estimate. So, you know, if it says opening bid 10,000, then it means the estimate's 20,000. It's definitely in the printed catalogs. And if it's not on the website, if there's already active bidding, I mean, feel free to ask. I'm happy to share that information.
And again, remind folks one more time how to get a hold of you.
Best way is through email. My email address is ssler@ha.com. So 2 S's, ISLER@ha.com. My phone number, I don't know it off the top of my head, to be quite honest. Well, I'm never on my office phone because I'm always bopping around. So
is it 1385?
Yes. I'm glad you know, Robert. Thanks.
It's 214-409-1385.
Oh, perfect. Oh my gosh. Thanks, everyone. Glad you guys know it. Yeah, call me anytime.
Well, I'm just doing what I can. Look, we have many folks who are still with us, so I'm willing to extend the time here for a few minutes more because there are some questions. This is about this particular copy of For Whom the Bell Tolls, and I assume that this is maybe a consignment question. Are all 15 of these copies For Whom the Bell Tolls accounted for? This person is asking because they have a similar first edition that is inscribed to Uncle Tom, and its pages seem tougher than normal. I don't believe it came with a jacket, though I do have mine displayed in a first edition jacket. So Lou, Sam, do we know if all 15 are known?
I don't believe all 15 are known. The advance copy was not issued in a jacket, and the difference between the first edition and the advance issue is a very small measurement. So I think the measurements are in the description. The advance copy is slightly larger than the first trade edition.
They're right here.
Oh, perfect. So go ahead and measure it. And if it matches the measurements of this one, please give me a call. I would love to know about another advance copy. I know Heritage sold an advance copy maybe 10 years ago. And as far as I know, those are the only 2 advance copies that have been on the market. This one and the one Heritage has sold.
Right. In the Baker bibliography of Hemingway, there's a full description of the 15 advance copies. So BAKR bibliography of Ernest Hemingway.
Leslie wants to know, Lou, Leslie's asking, could you please cite the book again that has the Hemingway Fitzgerald story?
Oh, that would be Dukedom Large Enough by David Randall, who was a bookseller, worked for Scribner's on his own, and worked with the Lilly Library. Dukedom, Dukedom, Large Enough. David Randall, his son Ron Randall is prominent bookseller.
We'll stop browsing here for a moment while I get through some of these questions, because there are a lot, which is very, very good. I appreciate the engagement, and that's what everybody's here for. And again, drop it in the Q&A, not in the chat. It's everybody, most of the questions are in the Q&A. All right. For those of us, Judy asks, for those of us who are moving to smaller homes, what do you recommend for collectors who need to downsize a collection? I assume, Samantha, you just want them to call you.
Yes, please.
But we need
That's
details.
214-409-1385. But that is, look, I think that everybody sort of, I think it can be overwhelming, right? If you have books, you tend to have a lot of books. And I think that people become sometimes overwhelmed by what to do with them. And they think that auction houses aren't necessarily going to be interested in all of them, maybe some of them, so they don't necessarily call an auction house. They may take them to a used bookseller. They may give them away, or they may just have an estate sale. In fact, I've called Samantha from many estate sales over the last 6 months and go, I think I found something that may be worth something. Can you tell me if it is? Which I'm sorry about. I'm sure it's very, very annoying. But
No.
I assume Samantha would like to see your books before you decide what to do with them. And that's probably for everybody on here.
And can I add my email address in case somebody has questions about material? I'm happy to answer them.
Please, absolutely, Lou.
At L Weinstein, WEINSTEIN, consultants with an S at gmail.com. L Weinstein consultants at gmail.com. And I actually answer everybody, whether you want to be answered or not.
And if we don't get to your questions, because they continue to pile up here as we approach the 1 o'clock hour Central Time, but we'll do a speed round here. What key differences do you see? This is Jim asking, what key differences do you see between international markets? As a UK collector, the market appears to be weighed toward the US, and most books, mainly British, I end up having to import back from the US. Is it a fair assumption that the United States market is more active? And if so, why do you think that is?
I think it's a global market, really. I mean, I have both clients, sellers, consigners, and buyers from all over the world. And so I think it's hard to specify, if the US market is stronger, because I don't really see a US market. I see a global market.
Well, one way to confirm that is if you ever go to a book fair, you'll notice an international book fair has a large number of Europeans. The reason the European dealers come over is because there's such a strong market in the United States. There are a lot of collectors here. I know most of the dealers I know in Europe, a lot of the best collectors are in America.
Someone asks, as a follow-up to your comment, Lou, about ARCs, I agree with Ken Lopez that reproofs, I think they're undervalued, considering they can be bibliographically significant and are certainly produced in low quantities and are usually more fragile and scarce. And unfortunately for the book trade, so are the collectors of these. It's interesting. I collected proofs for many years just because I would get them at work sometimes back in my journalism days. And I've always kind of wondered about holding on to those. And if I do see in rare bookstores that they are often considered to be incredibly valuable. Are you finding that they are coming to the market more and more these days?
Well, I have my own opinion. And my own opinion is that most collectors would rather have a mint copy of a first edition of a particular book than a proof copy in wrappers. Even though the proof copy precedes it, I find that the mint copy of the first edition is often more appealing. I think that the proof copy market itself is somewhat flat compared to copies in the trade edition, as they call it, in fine condition. But that's how I see it. Even though most completists would want both. They'd want the advanced copy, they'd want the limited sign, they want the trade, they want the first illustrated edition, they want a finely bound edition. I know collectors that only collected one book that they'd have like more than 1,000 copies, only one book, but there are 1,000 different editions. So collections go in all different.
Well, but what about this Stephen King Firestarter, this limited edition? It's 26 lettered copies. They're signed by, these are certainly, I would assume that this is sort of at the top of that pile of books that you would want from an author. Here we again talking about 20th century authors, limited collections, autographed. This to me seems sort of like one of those holy grail items based upon the conversation we've had today.
Yeah, and it's certainly considered that way among those who collect Stephen King. So, I mean,
I have a different opinion of limited signed editions, the deluxe editions. I mean, things done in 5 and 10 copies, usually you can't get them anyway. But most limited signed editions are published as collectibles and nobody ever throws them away. Everybody keeps them, so they stay in good condition. And they're just value-wise, for the most part, I think they appreciate considerably less than anything else. It's like Franklin Mint books or something like that. Anything issued as a collectible very rarely ends up being a collectible. That's my own opinion. Because the market, it's already suggesting you're paying a premium now because this is a collectible. I think it's just good marketing, but I don't think it's good investing. Personal opinion.
Let's. Several people have asked about restoration. Your thoughts on restoration? If you think that should they get their books restored? Does it add to the value of the book? Is it worth the cost? So I'll let you answer those. They're all kind of the same question and asked in different forms. So I'll let you give the speedy answer.
Because I used to own barns where I did restoration. There's only one question you have to ask. What's a regular copy worth? If a regular copy is worth $300 and your copy needs $250 worth of repair, you don't want to repair it. If it's a $2,500 book and it's in poor condition, it's only worth $300 or $400 or $500, but if you repair it, it might be worth $1,200 or $1,500. So you have to ask the question backwards. What is the value of a fine copy of that? And if it's high enough, it would justify the cost of restoration. That's how I see it. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And some of it's personal preference. I mean, typically if someone comes to me with a book that's not in great condition and asks if they should have it restored before I sell it, typically I say no, because you don't necessarily know what the buyer is going to be interested in. So it's easier to give them that option of restoring it later if they want, or keeping it as is. I think in general, restoration tends to slightly decrease the value, especially when you're talking about a restored dust jacket. But that doesn't mean sometimes that restorations aren't necessary to protect the integrity of the book.
I might add that maybe 75% of all restoration that I did in my bindery, we did for people who had sentimental value, whether it was a Bible or a school book or something that they used or their grandfather had. Then the value is irrelevant. You should have it restored. The things that you shouldn't have concern yourself if you think you have an object that would increase in value because you restore. You have to at least check that.
I'll get through some others real quick. Thanks for everybody for sticking with us. I knew that this might be the case because this is certainly a subject in which many people have a great deal of interest. What is the lower end price range that Heritage accepts for auction? Sam, I'll let you take that.
So individual books should be have an estimate of at least $500. Our non-floor session tends to be between $500 and $1,000, and then our floor session is $1,000 and up, and our consignment minimum is $5,000. But obviously, the better the books, the higher the price, the more we want them.
But of course, I might add, if you have a valuable collection and you have some lower end material, we will try our best to include them in the consignment. Occasionally, we might have to lot a few things, but we try to be open with people who have unusually valuable material.
Mark asks, my sense is that my collection of books about exploration, mostly African exploration, suffered in value with the advent of the internet. In fact, sort of this is a question that's come up a few times. There seems to be some recovery now. Can you provide approximate quantitation of the curve of value over several decades for books in the 2,000 to 20,000 range?
Well, that's pretty good. If they're 2 to 20,000, that's pretty good. If they were books under 2,000, I think they suffered a lot because so many copies came out. Books that are in the higher range tend to be scarce enough that I don't think the internet has affected it as much. It's just given you a more exact evaluation. If you look at 6 copies of a book, they're generally priced accordingly. The mint copy is 7,500 and the good copy is 5,000 and the one copy is 2,500. And people who put them online have to fit them in. So all the internet really did is give us a clearer picture of the value of your particular copy. And I think that you're better off buying one great copy of a book for $5,000 than 2 good copies for $2,500, as far as evaluation in the future goes, my opinion.
Nikki asks, do sets of books tend to have more value? For example, I have a set of 14 books, each of different Shakespeare plays published in New York in 1894. So is her collection more valuable? Obviously, I assume it's more valuable collectively than singularly.
Not necessarily.
Yeah?
No, I mean, if you're talking about a complete set, if the complete set is 14 volumes and it is complete, absolutely. A complete
But
set.
I should add that when you come to Shakespeare, there are literally hundreds of editions. A set is never first editions. It's collected editions of an author after he becomes popular. And somebody like Shakespeare, 14 volumes is probably not complete. It's probably 20 or 30 volumes. That would be very unusual. But a set like that, the value would be strongly based on the binding and the condition visually, because it has, unless it's illustrated by somebody important or owned by somebody important, that wouldn't be an unusually valuable set. It would be very limited collective interest, even though it's 1890s.
Sam, this is for you. Can a bidder get the provenance of lots from upcoming auctions? I'm interested in several lots and would like to know their provenance if possible. I assume that they can reach out to you to discuss that for those individual lots.
Yes, sometimes we can share the provenance, not always. But yes, if you have questions about specific lots, let me know, and if I can answer them, I will.
Craig asks, what is the status of author collections these days?
Well, we talking 20th century, 19th century? It helps to know the difference.
Okay.
19th century, excuse me?
He's not.
The reason I said distinguished, or even 18th century, because books would be valuable enough 18th, 19th century collections. 20th century collections, generally 10% of the high spots are 80% of the value in any author collection. Often people are better off either selling it in block as a collection if they can, or if they want to sell the high spots separately, they'd still represent a good part of the value at auction. But without knowing which author he's referring to, it's hard to make a specific comment. You know?
Somebody asked earlier, Tom asks about our discussion about forgeries a while ago. How do we assess know that these are real? Obviously, we have internal experts and external experts who do a lot of that verification for us. I don't know if you want to address it any further than that, but certainly nothing goes out the door that we have.
No, well, the important thing they should understand, Sam, I'm sorry for talking so much, it's genetic defect. But one of the reasons you should seriously consider buying either at auction or a well-established dealer is because we have to guarantee everything we sell unequivocally. Because if something is wrong, we don't want to sell it. We reject a lot of material that we don't believe to be correct. We're very careful in screening material from where it came from, how it looks, comparing to other copies and so on. But there are abundance of forgeries out there, but not in printed books, mostly in just simple autographs, not even in letters and manuscripts. It's much too time consuming and it requires too much talent.
I will find there's a couple more. Can you comment on the value of original illustrations that were prepared for inclusions in books? And perhaps you might have comments about original drawings, particularly political ones, that were prepared for publication in daily newspapers. Obviously, we've sold the Beatrix Potter illustrations for Winnie the Pooh and other things like that. Certainly, they come up quite frequently. they're obviously incredibly significant and valuable as well. Yes.
So important to know which illustrator he's referring to. So again, it's like saying, what's a painting worth? Who's the artist? What is the drawings worth? Who's the illustrator? We'll be happy to respond if we had all the information.
Right.
Send us the information on what original drawings you may have available, and we'll be happy to respond.
Excellent. Well, I see Lou just dropped out of our conversation.
Oh, my low battery just came on. I didn't realize we were going to chat so long.
I have to say I didn't either, but we have dozens of people who've remained with us, Lou. So I'm going to cut everybody loose. Somebody asked about the Pulp Fiction, like the Black Masks. I will say that we are seeing remarkable success these days when it comes to pulps. We just set a world record for a Shadow #1 over the weekend.
I'm just going to get a charger.
We just set a record for the Shadow, so Pulp Fiction is certainly doing remarkably well. Sam, do we add protective sleeves to the dust jackets?
Sometimes, a lot of times they come with it if warranted. Yes, we keep wrought art.
Okay.
Yeah, behind my desk at work. I'm at home.
All right. So the last question here that we'll take, and again, if there are questions for Sam, it's S. Sisler, right?
Yes.
Sorry.
At HE.
That's all right. I'm going to cut you loose here in just a second, but I'm going to the questions keep coming fast and furious.
Well, please email the questions in and we'll try to address them.
Yeah. So the last one is, well, it's about the desirability of important editions of books printed in a language other than English for a book that is in English. I assume that, look, one thing I've learned in this conversation and from the year of being here, just from a lifetime of collecting books, is that different things make different things collectible. If it's a German edition of The Great Gatsby, it's probably more valuable if it's the first edition. If the rarer, the more difficult to find, and so forth. I assume it's just one of the many criteria one uses to gauge the collectability and value of a particular piece, correct?
Yes, absolutely. There's a famous Italian edition of Alice in Wonderland that people collect. There's an Irish one too that we've sold recently. Yeah, foreign language books, even if the book wasn't originally printed in that language but has since been translated, there certainly can be a market for things.
There are completions out there that will buy every translation of a particular title that they relate to or love.
Well, look, I can't thank you enough, and I can't thank everybody who's been here for the last over an hour. We still have dozens of people who've been here with us and who have had all great questions. I'm sure we'll do this sooner than later. In fact, Sam and I are going to be doing a discussion in the next couple of weeks with Justin Schiller and with Tyler Measom, the director of Murder Among the Mormons, to discuss something that is in the upcoming auction, something we don't often sell, which is a very known forgery, this Oath of a Freeman. So we'll be sending out invitations for that upcoming very soon to discuss this really, really kind of amazing piece. But obviously, the sale is upcoming June 9th, starts at 11 a.m. Central Time and takes place for the 2 days after that. I can't thank everybody enough for being here, and I can't thank you enough, Sam and Lou. It's delightful to meet you. I look forward to seeing you next week. If anybody has further questions, everyone who's left a comment here has said how much they've thoroughly enjoyed this. So none more than I. So thank you so very, very much.
Thank you.
This was fun, gentlemen. Thanks so much.
You bet. We'll do it next time. Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.